In 1945, the Charter of the Nuremberg International Military Tribunal defined war crimes as a deliberate, gross, and intentional violation of the laws of customs of war. War crimes are associated with unleashing an unprovoked war of aggression, crimes against humanity, as for instance, military attacks on civilians, and of course, genocide. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Ukrainian and international human rights defenders have recorded over 18,500 war crimes. And these are deliberate murders, kidnappings, torture, rape, property damage, looting and other atrocities committed by the Russian military against Ukrainian civilians. The real number of crimes may be much higher. The winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Ukrainian human rights defender Alexandra Matviichuk, emphasizes in her speech, there are no legitimate purposes to force people to go down to the basement, order them to choose 8 volunteers, and there is no purpose to shooting them. No purpose in shooting a 14-year-old boy at close range who was just playing with a ball in the yard. There is also no military necessity for it. Russians have only done these things because they could. Cruelty, sadism, looting, sexual violence against civilians have become a distinctive pattern of the Russian army. As we could see in Chechnya, in Syria, in Georgia, Moldova, and now in Ukraine. For decades, Russia has irrepressibly committed war crimes in different parts of the world and has never been called upon to take the responsibility for that, let alone to be punished. Arbitrariness and confidence in one's own impunity reveal the terrible insides of the Russian army. War crimes have become a common method of waging war for Russia. Can the world remain an uninvolved, disinterested, an outside observer? My name is Gregor Razumovsky, and today I'll tell you a little bit more about what you need to know about Russia. UnArmia, short for the Russian term Young Army, is a Russian children's and youth paramilitary organization. Children aged 8 to 18 with good physical fitness can join this military and patriotic organization. According to its official website, UnArmia revived the good traditions of youth organizations. First of all, the pioneer movement created by Stalin, but also strongly inspired by the Hitlerjugend. To be clear, along with radical ideological propaganda and team interaction skills, children are being prepared for service in the armed forces of Russia. That is its openly declared purpose. All children in UnArmia learn to assemble and disassemble weapons, to shoot, throw grenades, to lay mines and clear minefields. In March 2022, the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu signed an order to involve the youngsters of the UnArmia, teenagers between 17 and 18, in Moscow's so-called special operation in Ukraine. Eerily similar to the high school students enlisted in 1943 in the Hitler Youth to serve and often die in anti-aircraft artillery squads at the end of World War II. Moreover, the UnArmia squads were generated purely by decree in the territories of Ukraine that are temporarily occupied by Russia. We really need to understand this. An aggressor invades a neighboring country and then forces children and youths from this very region to fight for him against their compatriots and possibly even their relatives. And this is in clear violation of the laws and customs of war, the Rome Statute and the UN Convention on the Rights of the child. And unarmed child soldiers from Russian cities have already been discovered among those who fell on the front during Russia's war in Ukraine. Daria Gerasimchuk, the Commissioner for Children's Rights and Child Rehabilitation of Ukraine, reported that according to official information, Russia forcibly kidnapped 2,389 children from Ukraine before deporting them against their and their parents' will to Russia. Russia's open effort to adopt Ukrainian children and bring them up as Russians is already well underway. And it is possibly one of the most explosive issues of the war, as an Associated Press investigation shows. After occupying the territories, Russian troops viciously disrupted the evacuation of children to Ukrainian regions controlled by Ukraine. Self-organized civilian convoys, such as 10 vehicles coming from Kupiansk in eastern Ukraine, marked with the white flags and the word Deity painted on their roofs, were fired upon. Out of the 20 humans killed, half were children. Some of the minors were taken away from their parents by the Russian occupation administration under the guise of relocating them to humanitarian children's camps. From there, the children never came back, having been adopted by Russians. Others, where the family was trying to escape from the war zone, were stopped at checkpoints by Russians and sent to orphanages. Russia claims that these children don't have parents or guardians to look after them, or that they can't be reached. But the AP uncovered that officials of the Russian Federation deported Ukrainian children to Russia or Russian-held territories. This, unsurprisingly, without consent. And the children were told that their parents didn't want them anymore. The children were used for propaganda and given to Russian families. In the past, Russian law prohibited the adoption of foreign children. But in May, Putin signed a law that legalized the abduction of Ukrainian children by Russians and their adoption by Russian families. For each Ukrainian child who becomes a Russian citizen, Russian families get up to 1,000 euros. There's also a state program of so-called camps which offer patriotic education to Ukrainian children and even a hotline to pair Russian families with children from Ukraine. American analysts point out that the systematic abduction of children aims to destroy, in full or in part, a national, ethnic, racial or religious group, and is a violation of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, as well as a direct violation of the Statute of Rome. In an interview with the AFP agency, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General on Sexual Violence in Conflicts, Pramila Patten, said, "Rape and sexual violence perpetrated by Russian soldiers in Ukraine are part of the military strategy of the Russian Federation. According to Patten, it is a deliberate tactic to dehumanize the victims used by Russia." The UN representative added, "When women are kept captive for days and raped, when little boys and men are raped, when you see genital mutilation and you hear women testifying about Russian soldiers having Viagra pills, it is clearly a military strategy." Pramila Patten also noted that the testimonies of the victims clearly reflect Russian propagandistic narratives that aim to dehumanize the victims. A UN report released in September 2022 confirms more than 100 cases of rape or sexual violence in Ukraine since the outbreak of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in February. According to the collected evidence, the age of the sexual violence victims ranges from 4 to 82 years old. And the UN calls this data the tip of the iceberg, referring to the difficulty of collecting evidence during active hostilities. UN experts consider Russian airstrikes in Syria war crimes. The report of the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry into the events in Syria emphasizes that Russian warplanes launched airstrikes on schools, hospitals and markets in Idlib province. As a result of such non-selective bombing, as it is called, hundreds of people were killed and injured, and about 1 million people were forced to leave their homes. The report, which covers the period from November 2019 to June 2020, is based on flight data and eyewitness accounts. And the UN Commission of Experts believes that these bombings took place without a recognizably legitimate military objective. According to the head of the Commission, Paulo Pinheiro, pro-government forces and formations identified by the UN as terrorists grossly violated the laws of war and the rights of Syrian civilians. The text describes 52 attacks in northwestern Syria. 47 of them, as claimed, were carried out by the Syrian government with Russian support. In particular, it refers to airstrikes on civilian objects in 2019, during which the Russian Air Force did not target specific military facilities, which constitutes a war crime of directing indiscriminate attacks in civilian areas. The OSCE found the Russian attack on the maternity hospital and the drama theater in Mariupol to be a gross violation of international humanitarian law. The organization also rejected the Kremlin's attempts to put blame for both war crimes on Ukraine. The 108-page-long OSCE report describes evidence of direct attacks by Russian troops on the civilian population and medical institutions of Ukraine. Quoting the report describes numerous particularly egregious attacks, such as the attack on the Mariupol Maternity Hospital and Children's Hospital on the 9th of March. It was found that the hospital was destroyed by a Russian missile strike. The mission agency concluded that this attack was deliberate, done without effective warning, and thus constitutes a clear violation of international humanitarian law and is a war crime. The document states that the mission agency indubitably refuted the Russian government's statement that the hospital was used by the Ukrainian military for its own purposes. Similarly, the mission agency found that the attack on the drama theater in Mariupol on the 16th of March is a gross violation of international human rights law, and that both those who ordered or executed it committed a war crime. In its investigation, the Associated Press notes that as a result of the Russian attack on the drama theater in Mariupol, about 600 people died inside and outside of the building. According to the estimates of the survivors, there were about 1,000 people inside during the strike, and no more than 200 people managed to escape. This is the YouTube channel The Power of Reason. Always remember that our true power lies in rational thought and a clear mind when we're threatened with the daily flow of disinformation and the manipulation of news. So please do the reasonable thing and subscribe to our channel right now.